During this time, which is very important to us, a time which is significant because it relates to the miraculous events of Lord Buddha's life, and also because this is Losar, the beginning of the Tibetan New Year, and for that reason has merit and importance as well. We are engaging in a retreat that is dedicated to Guru Rinpoche. Guru Rinpoche to us represents the quintessential Guru. He is all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas rolled into one. He is all Gurus rolled into one. He is important and meaningful to us because it is he that actually brought the path to Tibet, and it is from that direct lineage that we practice. So he is like a mother and a father to us in that he gives us the sustenance upon which we rely. And for this reason, we are reminded that we are constantly drinking from a fountain, constantly drinking from a cup of nectar that is to us obtainable nowhere else. Since this is where our path lies, since this is where our karma is, and since this is where we have actually achieved result. For us, Guru Rinpoche is then like the mother and the father. So it's auspicious and important and meaningful to us to actually practice Guru Rinpoche at this time. When we practice Guru Rinpoche, however, it's easy to fall into the pit of thinking of this practice in a very superficial way. It's easy to think that, well, I am a person here and I should go to the goal which is over there. And think about the practice in a very linear way, in a way that enhances the delusion of separation or enhances the idea of duality, rather than to practice in the most appropriate way, that is to say, a way that would help us to realize something of our nature. In order to prevent that from happening, I would like to go back and re-emphasize some very foundational thoughts, that is to say, very basic thoughts in the Buddhist philosophy. First of all, according to the Buddha, and if we study, we can easily see, we are revolving endlessly in cyclic existence. We experience birth and death, and we continue to revolve in that process. According to the Buddha, we have experienced so many births and so many deaths that they are at this point uncountable, that there aren't numbers to express how that is. According to the Buddha, it is such a great long period of time since we first conceived of self-nature as being inherently real, since that first conceptualization of egocentricity, that we can't measure the time. So according to that view, we have had a very great long time to develop a strong habitual tendency to think in a certain way, and that way is expressed as dualistic thought. We think in a certain way, and that way becomes for us such a tight fixation, such a tightly wrapped compulsive process, and so much a part of the fabric of our minds, that all of our senses are wrapped around that process. All of our conceptualizations, all of our perceptions are naturally formed due to this habitual process. And that process is the distinction between self and other. We know nothing else. We know no other kind of mindset, no other method of perception. There is no other view that we have ever really tasted other than the distinction between self and other. All of our perceptual process, all that we do, all that we think, from the most subtle levels of perception, even those which are beneath our ordinary understanding, to the grossest levels of perception that we participate in when we know ahead of time and then find out that it's so true that we must pick up this book in order to move from this place to that place. We are deeply and profoundly involved in this process, and we always have been. And this process is the child of and is birthed from the automatic and, if you will, all-pervasive assumption of self-nature as being solid and intrinsically real. From the moment that we assume the nature of self, we begin to engage in a process of distinguishing self from other. Because once you have a self, you must continue to define it, or the term self has no meaning. It must constantly be defined. And it is that process of definition and evaluation and reevaluation and exaggeration that is the mother, the parent of all of our experience. Based on that kind of perception, we react toward everything as being external. We distinguish self, we distinguish other, and we enter into a very reactive mode. We distinguish all phenomena, and we react toward all phenomena with attraction or repulsion. Reacting with attraction or repulsion, we engage in a cyclic and never-ending process of hope and fear. Even on the most subtle levels, our own thoughts, we actually distinguish as being separate from ourselves. So fixated are we on the discrimination involved with the perception of self-nature as being inherently real, that we actually think of our thoughts as being separate as well. So this process takes place on a very subtle level. Our feelings, even those, even our perceptions, are perceived to be different. You can view that within your own mind by understanding how you think. You think that you think. You think, I have this feeling. I feel this way. I taste. I have this sense. I'm having this thought, and therefore I am. That kind of thing. We're constantly involved in a process like that. And so these distinctions can take place on a very subtle level, but we are constantly defining the limits of self and constantly determining where self ends and other begins. Of course, it's obvious just to realize that we think of this book as being separate and we think of this plant as being separate, or we would not see them in this shape and in this form. And it goes on from there. Everything that we experience as being relative to self. How do we record, how do we compute the size of this book? We compute it as relative to self. The size of this book is not the same to an ant. To an ant, this book is a place you can live on. This liquid, to me, is cold. Is it cold to a fish that lives in the deepest part of the sea, where the temperature is very low, by our standards? Everything that we perceive is relative to self. According to the teaching, the five senses themselves are actually extensions of ego. They are functions of the ego, our very five senses, upon which we totally rely. How many times have I taught a new group of people and have they said to me, well, I don't know whether I should believe the Buddha because my own senses tell me thus and such. According to my senses, I've only lived once and I haven't even died yet. So how can I believe the Buddha when he says I've lived and died many times? We don't understand that not only are we looking through very limited rose-colored glasses, but also these very 5 senses are extensions of the ego, and they tell us exactly what the ego wishes to affirm. And they also tell us exactly what is relative to the belief in self. And everything, all of our perceptions, are based on the perception of self. Every single one of them. So when we rely upon the Buddha, or an enlightened being who is also considered to be a fully realized Buddha, such as Guru Rinpoche, we rely on that one because they have achieved the state beyond sorrow, the state beyond suffering. That state which is beyond the ordinary perceptual process that we are so firmly fixated in, and beyond which we cannot see. These ones that have crossed the ocean of suffering no longer function in the same way, using the 5 senses as an extension of self, but instead have accomplished the awareness and the awakening to the primordial wisdom state. And for them, the 5 senses are not 5 extensions of the ego, but instead are the 5 celestial pristine views. They are the 5 primordial perceptions. Perceiving true nature in its pristine clarity according to their attainment. And it is because of that that they are able to teach us about the nature of emptiness. That they are able to teach us about that primordial nature which is our nature, that nature which is emptiness and luminosity, indivisible. Not only that, but because of their extraordinary view, because of their undefiled and therefore unlimited perception, they are able to point out cause and effect relationships that we simply can't see. Due to our belief in self-nature as being inherently real, due to our ego clinging, we are able to see one span of life, period. We are able to understand that we were born, although we can't really remember it, but we have eyewitnesses. And we are able to understand our early life. We have memories that extend the span of one lifetime, period. And even those of us that come in here, and there are many that come in here and say, oh, I do recall my past lives. Even those of us that feel that we can recall our past lives, still, let's admit it, there's just a little doubt. This memory is not as solid as the memory that we have as to what we had for breakfast this morning. This memory isn't as real to us, and furthermore, there aren't any eyewitnesses. We are then limited according to our entrapment in the perception of I, of egocentricity. But the Buddha doesn't have that limitation. The Buddha, due to his understanding of the length of the continuation of the extraordinary length of time involved with cyclic existence, and due to the Buddha's realization that the time in which we first conceived self-nature to be inherently real was a long time ago, and due to the Buddha's lack of entrapment or fixation on any certain phenomena as being more real than other phenomena, due to that, the Buddha is able to see through the power of the naturally arisen omniscience that occurs in this state, cause and effect relationships that occur since time out of mind and continue to occur from the present moment into a future that is also inconceivably long. So we have a choice then, and that choice is based on deciding for ourselves whether or not we want to rely on these limited five senses, or whether we want to rely on the view of one who has surpassed that process entirely. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that we become jellyfish. Neither does it mean that we should simply engage in blind faith and just believe anything that anyone tells us. Neither should we lose our power of decision. But we have to understand what it is that should cause our decision to be firm, on what basis we should make our decision. I, for one, for all that I do in my life and for all that's happening here in this temple, am very much a materialist, in that I look at cause and effect relationships and I study them very carefully. And I'm an extremely practical person. You'll never see me listening to the teachings, for instance, of someone that came up with an idea maybe 10 or 20 years ago and says that that idea will produce some result. I would have to see for myself that that path that is being offered, first of all, arises from the mind of enlightenment. Someone coming up with an idea simply isn't good enough for me. It has to arise from the mind of enlightenment, and it has to be a path that is practiced a long enough time to have produced the appropriate results again and again and again, where I can see that these results have been produced. I like to see evidence. In our lineage, we have the great good fortune of seeing relics that are produced by the bodies of our lamas at the time of their death through miraculous means. Awesome things, things that you simply can't see in ordinary life. And these are made available to us to hold and to cherish and to look at. Things that can be produced through no other means. I wait until I see the signs that show me that something extraordinary has happened. I want to hear about, and I want to hear from those who have seen the evidence of the lamas in our lineage who have died and attained the rainbow body, whose bodies have produced sweet scent at the time of their cremation, whose bodies have produced rainbows in the sky and extraordinary signs like certain appearances that ordinary people can see. These are the kinds of things that I want to see. I'm much too hard-headed and much too practical to practice a path in which such results are not achieved. Then once I have seen that that has happened, and once I have seen that this is a method, I'm much too practical and much too hard-headed to mix and match my path. I won't draw a little from here and a little from there and mix it up from there. I'll keep the lineage firm, and I'll keep it straight, and I'll keep it pure. I can appreciate anything anyone else is doing, but if I'm going to cross the ocean of samsara, if I'm going to cross the very ocean of suffering, I'm going to do it in one boat. I'm not going to try to do it in two boats. It's very hard to cross an ocean in two boats. One can get split right up the middle. An event that does not appeal to me in the least. And practicing a path that has produced results, I know that I am crossing the ocean in a boat with no holes. a boat that is equipped with oars in which to row, and a boat with an appropriate guide. All of these things being the case, feeling that I have found the path, I now come to a thought which is very important for us on this day. It is the thought of the importance of the Buddha, and most especially since this is a Guru Rinpoche retreat, it is a thought of the preciousness and the importance of practicing Guru Yoga, or devotion, as we think of it. For us, Guru Rinpoche is that one who has attained the state beyond suffering, whose very senses are no longer ordinary, and who can perceive not in the ordinary way that we perceive, through the process of discursive thought, through the distinction between self and other, constantly involved in the reaffirmment and restatement of ego. He doesn't do that. Having attained the state beyond suffering, his very senses are the lens through which we can begin to understand our true nature. He perceives in a different way entirely. His perception is celestial perception, pure perception. He has realized the state that is beyond suffering. He has realized that nature which is emptiness and luminosity, non-dual. His very activity is the dance of compassion, and there is no pollutant within that dance. His qualities are those qualities of enlightenment. Pristine, pure, free of contrivance, naturally arising and spontaneously liberated. He is the quintessential realization. These things being the case, then I feel that I must do my best to practice accordingly. And practice accordingly means many things. It means, first of all, practicing Guru Yoga in such a way that I can clear my mind and recognize his true nature. But it doesn't mean to remain on a superficial level, in that I do not constantly think about this man over there that I'm trying to get next to. It isn't like that. Neither do I think of my root teachers in that way, as being that person over there that I must get next to. But the proper way, actually, to practice Guru Yoga is more like to use that external representation of enlightenment, and that is what the Guru is. An external representation of enlightenment, a dance, an appearance, a movement, a scent of that which is precious. And seeing that, I can begin, through practicing purely and trying to understand what the nature of that appearance is, I can then relate to the true Guru, which is our own inner awareness, our own primordial nature. That is the true Guru. So hard to see, so hard to taste. Because we are so locked up in what I am and what I think, and even now, we can't help but listen to these teachings with judgment. So hard to listen to them with a calm and stable mind, and with a sense of wisdom. And locked up as we are in that kind of perception, we find ourselves unable to perceive our own true nature. It is the same karma, it is the same event that causes us to be unable to see the nature of the Guru that causes us to be unable to see our own nature. And the practice, therefore, is the same. If it is to walk through the door of liberation that we truly desire, if it is to awaken at last, as if from a fever, to the precious state which is beyond suffering, if the goal is to practice in such a way as to attain the literal potency to be able to liberate beings from suffering, if that is the goal, then to recognize that state as appearing as our teachers, to realize the teacher is the very Buddha in his mind, to realize the teacher is the very Dharma in his activity, to realize the teacher is the very Sangha in his body, to purify our perception so that we can understand in that way, is a method by which we attain our own inner awareness. We see our teachers, unfortunately, as ordinary beings. We see ourselves, unfortunately, as ordinary beings. The cause is the same. It is the fixation on self-nature as being inherently real. It is the fixation on phenomenality. And so we practice Guru Yoga for that reason. And the reason is to know that nature which is actually our own true face. When we practice recognizing Guru Rinpoche and our own root teachers as being the face of our own enlightenment, we practice it with the hope that we will recognize that face, and recognizing that face is recognizing it. Furthermore, even if we manage in theory to recognize Guru Rinpoche as the quintessential Buddha, as the quintessential Guru, we then can't seem to follow his instructions, because he instructed us to recognize that he appears in his nature as our own root teachers. Now here we've managed to think of Guru Rinpoche, let's say, in this theoretical way as being the quintessential Buddha, the quintessential Guru. But he's not here right now, in his body. And yet his parting words were, "I will appear as your root teachers." What does that mean? Does that mean in the way that perhaps spiritualists think, that Guru Rinpoche is over our back shoulder? Is he speaking in our ears? Is he telling us what to tell to you? What a limited way to think. If we understand Guru Rinpoche at all, we understand that Guru Rinpoche is Kunta Zangpo and Kunta Zangmo. The very primordial essence. Guru Rinpoche is the appearance in Nirmanakaya form of the pristine, awakened nature. That nature appears as our own root teachers. Our own root teachers offer us the ripening, the empowerment of the very Buddha nature. Our own root teachers offer us the path, which is the Dharma. Our own root teachers offer us the Sangha, which is the very body. Recognizing the nature is the pith practice that we will ever accomplish. It is the essence practice, and it begins with Guru Yoga. I would like to read to you an excerpt from a book that I like very much. It's a book by His Holiness Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, and it's called The Wish-Fulfilling Jewel. And it's about the practice of Guru Yoga in the Longchen Nyingtig tradition. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good reader in any language, but I'll do the best I can, and you manage to have pure view, if you will. On the absolute level, the teacher is one with the very nature of our own mind, which is itself the essence of Buddhahood. What then is the method for realization of this absolute teacher? Through the outer or relative teacher and his pith instructions, we can bring ourselves to the realization of the inner or absolute teacher, which is awareness itself. The foundation and thus the very basis for the accomplishment of this realization is the present Guru Yoga, which belongs to the outer method and is classified technically as a part of the preliminary practices. Since the actual heart of all other stages and practices is precisely this Guru Yoga, one would be quite mistaken to think of it as just a preliminary practice and therefore unimportant. Rather, we should realize that if we practice this Guru Yoga continuously throughout our entire life, then all the blessings of Guru Rinpoche himself will easily enter our being. Essentially, the practice is to remember the Guru in all of our activities, whether in meditation or in post-meditation periods. Thus, the actual sadhana does not require that we remain within the boundaries of a retreat, and it is appropriate for all occasions and circumstances, as well as for practitioners of all levels. Since the mind dwells within the body, it is important to assume a proper body posture. When the trunk and spine are held in an upright position, the channels become straight and the mind becomes clear. If we lounge about in a completely careless manner, it will be quite difficult for concentration or samadhi to be born properly within us. Therefore, we should sit in the 7-point posture called the Vairocana posture. This practice of Guru Yoga is meant to generate extraordinary devotion, the fervent devotion that allows us to see the Guru as in no way different from Lord Buddha himself. If one sees the teacher merely as an ordinary being, then one will receive only the blessings of ordinary beings. If one sees him as an arhat or a pratyeka Buddha, then one will receive the corresponding blessings. If one sees the teacher as a bodhisattva, one will receive the blessings of the bodhisattva. If, however, one can see the teacher as the Buddha, one will then receive the blessings of the Buddhas. There is no Buddha who will become enlightened, or who has become enlightened, without having relied upon a spiritual teacher. So to be able to practice genuine Dharma, one must first search for a fully realized master and attend him with total confidence. As it is said in the sutras, it is through faith alone that one can realize the absolute nature. Without faith, even if one knows all the sections of the teachings by heart, it is of no use. This is particularly true for the practitioner of the Vajrayana. How then should we generate this fervent devotion? At present, the Guru has assumed a human form and resembles an ordinary person, but the mind is unwaveringly settled in wisdom. If we could know his innermost mind, we would discover that, through his having been able to discard all defects and realize all that there is to be realized, he is equal in all aspects and qualities to a perfectly enlightened Buddha. This discovery is the source of deep and genuine devotion. He is like a great ship for beings to cross the perilous ocean of existence, an unerring captain who guides them to the dry land of liberation, a rain that extinguishes the fire of the passions, a bright sun and moon that dispel the darkness of ignorance, a firm ground that can bear the weight of both good and bad, a wish-fulfilling tree that bestows temporal happiness and ultimate bliss, a treasury of vast and deep instructions, a wish-fulfilling jewel granting all the qualities of realization, a father and mother giving their love equally to all sentient beings, a great river of compassion, a mountain rising above worldly concerns, unshaken by the winds of emotions, and a great cloud filled with rain to soothe the torments of the passions. In brief, he is the equal of all the Buddhas. To make any connection with him, whether through seeing him, hearing his voice, remembering him, or being touched by his hand, will lead us toward liberation. To have full confidence in him is the sure way to progress toward enlightenment. The warmth of his wisdom and compassion will melt the ore of our being and release the gold of the Buddha nature within. Whether or not we achieve realization depends entirely upon our devotion to the Guru. For instance, Tilopa did not ask and Dorje Chang did not offer a single word of teaching, yet Tilopa was liberated. This was due simply to the strength of Tilopa's devotion. If the disciple has the ring of faith and devotion, then the hook of the Guru's wisdom and compassion will pull him swiftly to the land of liberation. As it is said, when the sun of fierce devotion shines on the snow mountain of the Guru's four kayas, the stream of blessing will pour down. Therefore, strive to generate devotion in your mind. And also, to remember the Guru for a single instant is infinitely greater than to meditate for 1,000,000 kalpas on 100,000 deities. Though the boundless compassion of Amitabha and Vajrasattva never forsakes us, due to our obscurations we cannot meet them face to face. Our own teacher, however, is kinder than all the Buddhas because we can now, in this very life, meet him in person and receive from him the precious instructions. The great teacher Patrul Rinpoche used a simple analogy. Not all rich people in the world are equally kind. The kindest people help poor people who have neither food nor sustenance. Even if we were to meet all the Buddhas in their paradises, we would not receive from them any teachings or instructions more extraordinary or more profound than those given to us by our own root teachers. Nor would we, through some miracle, be lifted from the lower realms and established in enlightenment by them in the way an aircraft lifts us into the sky. How I think about this teaching is like this. How useless it would be for me to think of my own root teacher and to think that perhaps Vajrasattva is more kind and more potent. How useless it would be for me to think of my own root teacher and think that perhaps Lord Buddha is greater in his realization. How useless it would be for me to think that at the time of my death, perhaps Lord Buddha Amitabha will be even more accessible. Because it is my teacher who, through the extraordinary and unusual method, found me and reached out to me and hooked me with his unusual kindness. It is my teacher who had the potency to reach out across time and space and fish me out of the ocean, even though the ocean is so vast and I am such a little fish. The potency of my teacher then to me is remarkable, because it is on him that I rely and none other. And on that basis, I will practice Guru Yoga. So, I hope that you will choose that as your own basis as well, and understand that this is the thought that we should keep with us always. The appearance of our own root teacher is like the hook of compassion emanating from the expanse of primordial wisdom itself, causing us to remain stable, causing us to find the path, causing us to enter through the door of liberation. It is an extraordinary event, equaled by none other in our lifetimes, and there will never be another moment like this. Nanda.